Russia, Japan, France, Japan, Russia, United States, Ukraine, Vietnam,
Japan, Nigeria,
Indonesia,
France, Mexico, Korea, Poland, Egypt, Vietnam, Canada, Sweden, Chile, Brazil, France, Japan, Nigeria, Mexico, Egypt, Poland, Korea, Brazil, Nigeria, France, Japan, Mexico, Korea, Egypt, Poland, Brazil, France, Nigeria, Japan, Germany, Ghana, Peru, Thailand, Sweden, Vietnam, Canada, Chile, Italy, Iran, Turkey, Cuba, Germany, Thailand, Peru, Ghana, Norway, Ukraine, Spain, Kenya, Italy, Turkey, Cuba, Iran, Spain, Kenya, Norway, Ukraine, Italy, Iran, Cuba, Turkey,
United Kingdom,
Argentina, Belgium, India, Morocco, Finland, Israel, Pakistan, Jamaica, Argentina, Morocco, Belgium, India, Pakistan, Jamaica, Finland, Israel, Netherlands, Serbia, Laos, Tunisia, United States, Qatar, Hungary, Colombia, Laos, Tunisia, Netherlands, Serbia, Colombia, Hungary, Qatar, United States,
United
Portugal, Denmark, Algeria, Iraq, Romania, Philippines, Ireland, Bolivia, Denmark, Portugal, Iraq, Algeria, Ireland, Bolivia, Romania, Philippines, China, Uruguay, Austria, South Africa, Belarus, Cambodia, Slovakia, Bangladesh, Austria, China, South Africa, Uruguay, Cambodia, Bangladesh, Belarus, Slovakia, Nepal, Iceland, Ecuador, New Zealand, Venezuela, Kuwait, Croatia, Saudi Arabia, Ecuador, Nepal, New Zealand, Iceland, Croatia, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Venezuela, Greece, Mongolia, Paraguay, Malaysia, Brunei, Myanmar, Hong Kong, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, Greece, Paraguay, Mongolia, Hong Kong, Sri Lanka, Brunei, Myanmar, Australia, Armenia, Taiwan, Palestine, Latvia, Estonia, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Taiwan, Australia, Parmast, Armenia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Estonia, Latvia,
United States,
Mexico, Korea,
South Korea,
Egypt, Vietnam, Canada, Sweden,
Japan,
Chile, Brazil, France, Japan, Nigeria,
Malaysia,
Egypt, Poland, Korea, Brazil, Nigeria,
China, Uruguay, Thailand,
Brazil, France, Nigeria, Japan, Germany,
Vietnam,
Canada, Chile, Italy, Iran, Turkey, Cuba,
Singapore,
Thailand, Peru, Ghana, Norway,
Uruguay,
Ukraine, Spain,
China,
Kenya,
Uruguay,
Italy, Turkey, Cuba, Iran,
Uruguay,
Spain,
France,
Kenya, Norway,
Uruguay,
Italy, Iran,
Vietnam, Uruguay,
Argentina, Belgium, India, Morocco, Finland, Israel,
Japan,
Pakistan, Jamaica, Argentina, Morocco, Belgium, India, Pakistan,
Vietnam,
Jamaica, Finland,
Germany,
Netherlands, Serbia, Laos, Tunisia, United
Uruguay,
States, Qatar,
Japan,
Hungary, Colombia, Tunisia,
South
Netherlands,
Korea,
Serbia, Colombia, Hungary, United States,
United States,
Denmark, Algeria, Iraq, Romania, Philippines, Ireland, Bolivia,
Vietnam,
Iraq, Algeria, Ireland, Bolivia, Romania,
Japan,
Philippines, China, Uruguay,
Germany,
South
Japan,
Africa, Belarus, Cambodia, Slovakia,
Vietnam,
Bangladesh,
Japan,
Austria, China, South Africa,
Japan,
Uruguay,
Ukraine,
Nepal, Iceland,
Japan, Vietnam, Japan, Germany,
Croatia, Saudi
Vietnam, Japan,
Ecuador,
Vietnam,
New Zealand, Iceland, Croatia,
Vietnam,
Saudi Arabia,
Singapore,
Kuwait,
Vietnam,
Venezuela, Greece,
Japan,
Mongolia, Paraguay,
Russia,
Malaysia,
Japan,
Myanmar,
Vietnam, Vietnam,
Malaysia, Greece,
Japan, Vietnam, Japan, Germany, Japan, Singapore, Japan, Malaysia, Vietnam, Japan,
Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan,
Japan, Vietnam, Vietnam, Japan, Vietnam, Malaysia,
Estonia,
Vietnam, Vietnam, Germany, Japan, Vietnam, Japan, Philippines, Vietnam, France, Vietnam, Cuba, Vietnam, 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 Japan, Vietnam, Vietnam, Ukraine, Vietnam, Vietnam, China, Cuba, Germany, Cuba, Thailand, Singapore, Mongolia, Vietnam, United Vietnam, Vietnam, Cuba, France, Vietnam, Cuba, Vietnam, Cuba, Mongolia, Vietnam, China, Vietnam, Ukraine, Vietnam, Cuba, France, Vietnam, Vietnam, Germany, Vietnam, United States, Indonesia, Cuba, Vietnam, United Philippines, Cuba, South Korea, Vietnam, 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 Cuba, United States, Vietnam, Morocco, Singapore, Thailand, Morocco, Thailand, United Malaysia, Morocco, Malaysia, Vietnam, Morocco, South Philippines, Morocco, Morocco, Cuba, Morocco, Vietnam, Vietnam, South Korea, Mongolia, Morocco, Morocco, Vietnam, Malaysia, Mongolia, Ukraine, Vietnam, South Korea, Vietnam, Malaysia, Vietnam, Thailand, South Mongolia, Malaysia, Malaysia, Mongolia, Morocco, United Kingdom, Cuba, Morocco, Malaysia, Thailand, Cuba, Malaysia, Ukraine, Mongolia, South Korea, Cuba, Japan, South Korea, Mongolia, Morocco, Vietnam, South Korea, Morocco, Vietnam, Cuba, South Korea, Vietnam, South Korea, Malaysia, South Korea, Malaysia, Malaysia, South Korea, Malaysia, Vietnam, France, Malaysia, South Malaysia, Vietnam, South Korea, Cuba, Turkey, Cuba, Malaysia, South Korea, South Korea, South Korea, South Korea, South Korea, Poland, Russia, Vietnam, Cuba, Malaysia, South Vietnam, South Malaysia, Cuba, South Korea, Vietnam, South Poland, Malaysia, Mongolia, Poland, Malaysia, Vietnam, South Korea, Vietnam, South Korea, Poland, South Vietnam, South Poland, Malaysia, Vietnam, Poland, South Korea, Mongolia, Poland, Vietnam, South Korea, South Korea, South Korea, Vietnam, 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 South Malaysia, South Korea, Vietnam, Malaysia, South Korea, Vietnam, South Vietnam, Vietnam, Malaysia, Vietnam, Vietnam, Malaysia, Vietnam, 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 South Korea, Malaysia, Vietnam, South Malaysia, Vietnam, Vietnam, South Korea, Vietnam, Vietnam, South Korea, Vietnam, South Korea, Japan, Vietnam, Malaysia, South Korea, South Malaysia, Vietnam, South Korea, South Korea, Russia, Vietnam, South Vietnam, Japan, Vietnam, Vietnam, Japan, Japan, Vietnam, Japan, in Vietnam, Russia, South Korea, Vietnam, Vietnam, Japan, Vietnam, South Korea, Vietnam, South Korea, Japan, South Korea, Japan, South Korea, Indonesia, China, Vietnam, South Brazil, Vietnam, South Korea, Vietnam, South Korea, Japan, South Korea, Japan, Brazil, Japan, South Korea, Brazil, Philippines, Japan, Japan, South Korea, Japan, South Korea, Brazil, South Korea, India, South Korea, Japan, Brazil, Vietnam, South Korea, Brazil, South Korea, South Korea, Brazil, Indonesia, South Korea, Vietnam, South Korea, Vietnam, South Korea, Japan, South Korea, South Korea, South Korea, Vietnam, Japan, South Korea, South Korea, Japan, South Korea, South Korea, South Korea, South Korea, Japan, Japan, South Korea, South Korea, Algeria, India, Japan, Algeria, Japan, Algeria, Japan, South Korea, Japan, Mexico, South Korea, Japan, South Korea, South Korea, South Japan, Algeria, Iran, South Philippines, India, South Korea, South Korea, South Korea, Japan, South Korea, Japan, South Korea, South Korea, Japan, South Korea, South Korea, Japan, South Korea, Russia, South Korea, South Korea, United Kingdom, Iran, South Korea, South Korea, South Korea, South Korea, South Korea, United States, Ukraine, Iran, China, Philippines, Iran, China, Ukraine, Iran, China, Iran, Russia, India, China, Iran, China, South Korea, Malaysia, Korea, China, 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 South Korea, China, 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 France, China, 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 Thailand, China, South Korea, China, France, China, South Korea, South Korea, South China, Vietnam, China, South China, South China, China, South Korea, Thailand, South Korea, South Korea,
Nigeria,
South Korea, South Korea,
Mexico,
China,
Egypt,
South Korea,
Poland, Korea,
China,
Brazil,
South Korea,
Nigeria,
Kazakhstan, South Korea, China, South China, China, South Korea, China, China, Thailand, China, South Korea, South China, South United States, South Korea, China, China, South Korea, South China,
Argentina, India, Morocco,
India,
Jamaica,
South Korea, China, India,
Jamaica, Valencia, Laos, United States,
South China, India, South Korea,
Qatar, United States,
India,
Portugal, Denmark, Algeria, Iraq, Romania, Philippines, Ireland,
South Korea,
Bolivia, Romania, Philippines, China, Uruguay, Austria, South Africa, Belarus, Cambodia, Slovakia, Bangladesh, Austria, China, South Africa, Uruguay, Cambodia, Bangladesh, Belarus, Slovakia, Nepal, Iceland, Ecuador, New Zealand, Venezuela, Kuwait, Croatia, Saudi Arabia, Ecuador, Nepal, New Zealand, Iceland, Croatia, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Venezuela, Greece, Mongolia, Paraguay, Malaysia, Brunei, Myanmar, Hong Kong, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, Greece, Paraguay, Mongolia, Hong Kong, Sri Lanka, Brunei, Myanmar, Australia, Armenia, Taiwan, Palestine, Latvia, Estonia, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Taiwan, Australia, Parmaisto, Armenia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Estonia, Latvia. Mexico, Korea, Poland, Egypt, Vietnam, Canada, Sweden, Chile, Brazil, France, Japan, Nigeria. Mexico, Egypt, Poland, Korea, Brazil, Nigeria, France, Japan. Mexico, Korea, Egypt, Poland, Brazil, France, Nigeria, Japan, Germany, Canada, Thailand, Sweden, Vietnam, Canada, Chile, Italy, Iran, Turkey, Cuba, Germany, Thailand, Peru, Ghana, Norway, Ukraine, Spain, Kenya, Italy, Turkey, Cuba, Iran, Spain, Kenya, Norway, Ukraine, Italy, Iran, Cuba, Turkey, Argentina, Belgium, India, Morocco, Finland, Israel, Pakistan, Jamaica, Argentina, Morocco, Belgium, India, Pakistan, Jamaica, Finland, Israel, Netherlands, Serbia, Laos, Tunisia, United States, Qatar, Hungary, Colombia, Tunisia, Netherlands, Serbia, Colombia, Hungary, United States, Portugal, Denmark, Algeria, Iraq, Romania, Philippines, Ireland, Bolivia, Denmark, Portugal, Iraq, Algeria, Ireland, Bolivia, Romania, Philippines, Uruguay, Austria, South Africa, Belarus, Cambodia, Slovakia, Bangladesh, Austria, China, South Africa, Uruguay, Cambodia, Bangladesh, Belarus, Slovakia, Nepal, Iceland, Ecuador, New Zealand, Venezuela, Kuwait, Croatia, Saudi Arabia, Ecuador, Nepal, New Zealand, Iceland, Croatia, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Venezuela, Greece, Mongolia, Paraguay, Malaysia, Brunei, Myanmar, Hong Kong, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, Korea, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Taiwan, Australia, Pakistan, Armenia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Estonia, Latvia.
China, South Korea, China, Thailand, China, 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 South Korea, China, China, United China, United South China, 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 South Korea, China, South Korea, China.
Magically cactus, sippy piro, magically cactus, sippy piro, magically cactus, sippy piro,
South Korea, China,
magically cactus,
South Korea,
sippy piro,
United China, Myanmar,
magically cactus, sippy piro,
China, India, South Korea, China, South Korea, Myanmar, China, South Korea, South Korea, China,
sippy piro,
China,
Cactus,
China,
Sipipirobos, Brazil, Japan, Nigeria, France, Korea,
Myanmar,
Poland,
United Kingdom,
Egypt, Vietnam, Canada, Sweden,
Myanmar, South
Chile,
Korea,
Brazil,
South Korea,
France, Japan,
Myanmar,
Nigeria,
China,
Mexico,
Philippines,
Poland,
China,
Korea,
Myanmar,
Nigeria,
China, India, Myanmar, China, India, Russia, Myanmar, Burma, South Korea,
Germany, Ghana, Peru, Thailand,
South Korea,
Sweden, Vietnam, Canada, Chile,
Vietnam,
Iran, Turkey,
Germany, Myanmar, South Korea,
Thailand, Peru,
Malaysia, South
Norway,
Korea,
Ukraine, Spain,
Russia,
Kenya,
India,
Delhi, Turkey,
South Korea,
Iran, Spain,
Vietnam,
Norway, Ukraine,
South Korea, Myanmar, Germany,
Cuba, Turkey,
Argentina, Belgium, India, Morocco, Finland, Israel,
South
Pakistan, Jamaica, Argentina, Morocco, Belgium, India, Pakistan, Jamaica, Finland, Israel, Netherlands, Serbia, Laos, Tunisia, United States, Qatar, Hungary, Colombia, Laos, Tunisia, Netherlands, Serbia, Colombia, Hungary, Qatar, United States.
Portugal, Denmark, Algeria, Iraq, Romania, Philippines, Ireland, Bolivia, Denmark, Portugal, Iraq, Algeria, Ireland, Bolivia, Romania, Philippines,
China, Uruguay,
Malaysia,
Austria, South Africa, Belarus, Cambodia, Slovakia, Bangladesh, Austria, China, South Africa, Uruguay, Cambodia, Bangladesh, Belarus, Slovakia.
Nepal, Iceland, Ecuador, New Zealand, Venezuela, Kuwait, Croatia, Saudi Arabia, Ecuador, Nepal, New Zealand, Iceland, Croatia, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Venezuela.
Greece, Mongolia, Paraguay, Malaysia, Brunei, Myanmar, Hong Kong, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, Greece, Paraguay, Mongolia, Hong Kong, Sri Lanka, Brunei, Myanmar, Australia, Namibia, Taiwan, Palestine, Latvia, Estonia, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Taiwan, Australia, Palestine, Armenia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Estonia, Latvia.
South Korea, South Korea, South Korea, China, India,
Change how you back, do it
South
so.
Korea,
Beep, beep, beat 'em.
South Korea, United States, Vietnam, Vietnam, South Korea, South
Beep, beep, beat 'em. Change how you back, do it so. Beep, beep, beat 'em. Beep, beat 'em.
Philippines, South Korea, Germany, Vietnam,
Change how you back, do it so. Beep, beep, beat 'em.
South Korea, South Korea, South Russia, Russia, South Korea, South Korea, South Korea, South Korea,
Nigeria,
Vietnam,
France, Mexico, Korea,
Vietnam,
Poland,
China,
Egypt,
South
Vietnam,
Korea, South
Canada,
Korea,
Sweden,
South Korea,
Chile, Brazil, France,
South
Japan,
Korea,
Nigeria,
Vietnam, Nigeria,
Mexico,
Singapore,
Egypt, Poland, Korea, Brazil, Nigeria, France, Japan, Mexico, Korea, Egypt, Poland, Brazil, France, Nigeria,
South Korea, South Korea,
Germany, Ghana, Peru, Thailand, Sweden, Vietnam, Canada, Chile, Italy, Iran, Turkey, Cuba, Germany, Thailand, Peru, Ghana, Norway, Ukraine, Spain, Kenya, Italy, Turkey, Cuba, Iran, Spain, Kenya, Norway, Ukraine, Italy, Iran, Cuba, Turkey,
Algeria,
Argentina, Belgium, India, Morocco, Finland, Israel, Pakistan, Jamaica, Argentina, Morocco, Belgium, India, Pakistan, Jamaica, Finland, Israel, Netherlands, Serbia, Laos, Tunisia, United States, Qatar, Hungary, Colombia, Laos, Tunisia, Netherlands, Serbia, Colombia, Hungary, Qatar, United States, Portugal, Denmark, Algeria, Iraq, Romania, Philippines, Ireland, Bolivia, Denmark, Portugal, Iraq, Algeria, Ireland, Bolivia, Romania, Philippines, China, Uruguay, Austria, South Africa, Belarus, Cambodia, Slovakia, Bangladesh, Austria, China, South Africa, Uruguay, Cambodia, Bangladesh, Belarus, Slovakia, Nepal, Iceland, Ecuador, New Zealand, Venezuela, Kuwait, Croatia, Saudi Arabia, Ecuador, Nepal, New Zealand, Iceland, Croatia, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Venezuela, Greece, Mongolia, Paraguay, Malaysia, Brunei, Myanmar, Hong Kong, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, Greece, Paraguay, Mongolia, Hong Kong, Sri Lanka, Brunei, Myanmar, Australia, Armenia, Taiwan, Palestine, Latvia, Estonia, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Taiwan, Australia, Parmast, Armenia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Estonia, Latvia. Canada, Sweden, Chile, Brazil, France, Japan, Nigeria, Egypt, Poland, Korea, Brazil, Nigeria, France, Japan, Korea, Egypt, Poland, Brazil, France, Nigeria, Japan, Germany, Ghana, Peru, Thailand, Sweden, Vietnam, Canada, Chile, Italy, Iran, Turkey, Cuba, Germany, Thailand, Peru, Ghana, Norway, Ukraine, Spain, Kenya, Italy, Turkey, Cuba, Iran, Spain, Kenya, Norway, Ukraine, Italy, Iran, Cuba, Turkey, Argentina, Belgium, India, Morocco, Finland, Israel, Pakistan, Jamaica, Argentina, Morocco, Belgium, India, Pakistan, Jamaica, Finland, Israel, Netherlands, Serbia, Laos, Tunisia, United States, Qatar, Hungary, Colombia, Laos, Tunisia, Netherlands, Serbia, Colombia, Hungary, United States, Portugal, Denmark, Algeria, Iraq, Romania, Philippines, Ireland, Bolivia, Denmark, Portugal, Iraq, Algeria, Ireland, Bolivia, Romania, Philippines, Uruguay, Austria, South Africa, Belarus, Cambodia, Slovakia, Bangladesh, Austria, China, South Africa, Uruguay, Cambodia, Bangladesh, Belarus, Slovakia, Nepal, Iceland, Ecuador, New Zealand, Venezuela, Kuwait, Croatia, Saudi Arabia, Ecuador, Nepal, New Zealand, Iceland, Croatia, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Venezuela, Greece, Mongolia, Paraguay, Malaysia, Brunei, Myanmar, Hong Kong, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, Greece, Paraguay, Mongolia, Hong Kong, Sri Lanka, Brunei, Myanmar, Australia, Armenia, Taiwan, Palestine, Latvia, Estonia, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Taiwan, Australia, Palestine, Armenia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Estonia, Latvia.
South Korea,
Bike, bike,
South,
bike, bike, bike,
Germany,
bike, 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 bike,
Brunei,
bike,
South Korea, South Korea, South Korea, South Korea, China, Turkey, South Korea, Thailand, United Vietnam, Turkey, South Korea, Singapore, South Korea, South India, South Korea, Philippines, Turkey, South Korea, Poland, South Korea, South Korea, South Korea, South Korea, South Korea, South Korea, France, South Korea, South Korea, Indonesia, South Korea, United Netherlands, South Korea, United States, South Korea, South Korea, South Turkey, South Korea, United States, South Korea, South Korea, Thailand, Indonesia, South Korea, South Korea, South Korea, South Korea, South Korea, Thailand, Germany, Turkey, South Korea, South Korea, South Korea, South Korea, South Korea, South Korea, Indonesia, Netherlands, South Korea, Singapore, Malaysia, South Korea, 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 Netherlands, China, Germany, South Korea, Poland, Germany, Thailand, South Korea, Algeria, South Korea, Thailand, South Korea, Germany, Malaysia, South Thailand,
Brazil, Japan, Nigeria, France,
South
Mexico, Korea, Poland,
South
Egypt,
South Korea,
Canada, Sweden,
South
Chile,
Korea,
Brazil,
South Germany,
France,
South
Japan,
Germany,
Nigeria,
South Netherlands, Russia, South Korea, South Korea,
Korea, Egypt,
Netherlands,
Germany, Ghana, Peru, Thailand,
Thailand,
Vietnam,
South Korea, South Korea, Thailand, South Korea,
like beep beep beating.
Russia, South Korea, Philippines,
Beep beep beating. Change out your belt, no soy. Beep beep beating. Beep beep beating.
South Korea, South Korea, South Korea, South Thailand, South Korea, South Vietnam,
Change out your belt, no soy. Beep beep beating.
South Korea, Vietnam,
Nigeria, France, Mexico, Korea, Poland, Egypt, Vietnam, Canada, Sweden, Chile, Brazil, France, Japan, Nigeria, Mexico, Egypt, Poland, Korea, Brazil, Nigeria, France, Japan, Mexico, Korea, Egypt, Poland, Brazil, France, Nigeria, Japan, Germany, Ghana, Peru, Thailand, Sweden, Canada, Chile, Italy, Iran, Turkey, Cuba, Germany, Thailand, Peru, Ghana, Norway, Ukraine, Spain, Kenya, Italy, Turkey, Kuwait, Iran, Spain, Kenya, Norway, Ukraine, Italy, Iran, Cuba, Turkey, Argentina, Belgium, India, Morocco, Finland, Israel, Pakistan, Jamaica, Argentina, Morocco, Belgium, India, Pakistan, Jamaica, Finland, Israel, Netherlands, Serbia, Laos, Tunisia, United States, Qatar, Hungary, Colombia, Laos, Tunisia, Netherlands, Serbia, Colombia, Hungary, Qatar, United States, Portugal, Denmark, Algeria, Iraq, Romania, Philippines, Thailand, Bolivia, Denmark, Portugal, Iraq, Algeria, Thailand, Bolivia, Romania, Philippines, China, Uruguay, Austria, South Africa, Belarus, Cambodia, Slovakia, Bangladesh, Austria, China, South Africa, Uruguay, Cambodia, Bangladesh, Belarus, Slovakia, Nepal, Iceland, Ecuador, New Zealand, Venezuela, Kuwait, Croatia, Saudi Arabia, Ecuador, Nepal, New Zealand, Iceland, Croatia, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Venezuela, Greece, Mongolia, Paraguay, Malaysia, Brunei, Myanmar, Hong Kong, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, Greece, Paraguay, Mongolia, Hong Kong, Sri Lanka, Brunei, Myanmar, Australia, Armenia, Taiwan, Palestine, Latvia, Estonia, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Taiwan, Australia, Burma, Armenia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Estonia, Latvia, Morocco, Korea, Poland, Egypt, Vietnam, Canada, Sweden, Chile, Brazil, France, Japan, Nigeria, Mexico, Egypt, Poland, Korea, Brazil, Nigeria, France, Japan, Mexico, Korea, Egypt, Poland, Brazil, France, Nigeria, Japan, Germany, Peru, Thailand, Sweden, Vietnam, Canada, Chile, Italy, Iran, Turkey, Cuba, Germany, Thailand, Peru, Ghana, Norway, Ukraine, Spain,
Thailand,
Canada,
South
Italy, Turkey, Cuba, Iran, Spain, Kenya, Norway, Ukraine, Italy, Cuba, Turkey, Argentina, Belgium, India, Morocco, Finland, Israel, Pakistan, Jamaica, Argentina, Morocco, Belgium, India, Pakistan, Jamaica, Finland, Israel, Netherlands, Serbia, Laos, Tunisia, United States, Qatar, Hungary, Colombia, Tunisia, Netherlands, Serbia, Colombia, Hungary, South Africa, Belarus, Cambodia, Slovakia, Bangladesh, Austria, China, South Africa, Uruguay, Cambodia, Bangladesh, Belarus, Slovakia, Nepal, Iceland, Ecuador, New Zealand, Venezuela, Kuwait, Croatia, Saudi Arabia, Ecuador, Nepal, New Zealand, Iceland, Croatia, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Venezuela, Greece, Mongolia, Paraguay, Malaysia, Brunei, Myanmar, Hong Kong, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, Greece, Paraguay, Mongolia, Hong Kong, Sri Lanka, Brunei, Myanmar, Australia, Armenia, Taiwan, Palestine, Latvia, Estonia, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Taiwan, Australia, Palestine, Armenia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Estonia, Latvia.
Cactus, city piro, Burj Khalifa,
South Korea,
city piro, Burj Khalifa, city piro,
Kuwait, China, Mongolia,
Khalifa,
South Korea,
city piro, Burj Khalifa, city piro,
Sri Lanka,
city piro, Burj Khalifa, city piro,
Nigeria, France, México, Korea, Poland, Egypt, Vietnam, Canada, Sweden, Chile, Brazil, France, Japan, Nigeria, Egypt, Poland, Korea, Brazil, Nigeria, France, Japan, Korea, Egypt, Poland, Brazil, Nigeria, Germany, Ghana, Peru, Thailand, Sweden, Vietnam, Canada, Chile, Italy, Turkey, Cuba, Germany, Thailand, Peru, Ghana, Norway, Ukraine, Spain, Kenya, Italy, Turkey, Cuba, Iran, Spain, Kenya, Norway, Cuba, Turkey,
Argentina, Belgium, India, Morocco, Finland, Israel, Pakistan, Jamaica, Argentina, Morocco, Belgium, India, Pakistan, Jamaica, Finland, Israel, Netherlands, Serbia, Laos, Tunisia, United States, Qatar, Hungary, Colombia, Laos, Tunisia, Netherlands, Serbia, Colombia, Hungary, Qatar, United States,
Portugal, Benin, Algeria, Iraq, Romania, Philippines, Ireland, Korea, Denmark, Portugal, Iraq, Algeria, Ireland, Bolivia, Romania, Philippines,
China, Uruguay, Austria, South Africa, Belarus, Cambodia, Slovakia, Bangladesh, Austria, China, South Africa, Uruguay, Cambodia, Bangladesh, Belarus, Slovakia,
Nepal, Iceland, Ecuador, New Zealand, Venezuela, Kuwait, Croatia, Saudi Arabia, Ecuador, Nepal, New Zealand, Iceland, Croatia, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Venezuela.
Cambodia,
Greece, Mongolia, Paraguay, Malaysia, Brunei, Myanmar, Hong Kong, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, Greece, Paraguay, Mongolia, Hong Kong, Sri Lanka, Brunei, Myanmar, Australia, Namibia, Taiwan, Palestina, Latvia, Estonia, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Taiwan, Australia, Palestina, Armenia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Estonia, Latvia.
in Taiwan, Italy, South Korea, South Germany, Taiwan, South Korea, Mongolia, South Korea, Indonesia, South Korea, Peru, Taiwan, Russia,
Всегда ебать душой.
Taiwan,
Пи-пи-пиром.
Mongolia, South Korea, Singapore, South Korea, Italy, South Korea, Indonesia, Mongolia, United
Пи-пи-пиром.
Taiwan, Indonesia, South Korea,
Всегда ебать
South Korea,
душой.
Taiwan,
Пи-пи-пиром.
South Korea, Ukraine, Indonesia, Mongolia, Taiwan, Algeria, South Mongolia, Thailand, Indonesia, South China, Indonesia, South Korea, Japan, South Indonesia, United South Korea,
Пи-пи-пиром.
South Indonesia, France, South Korea, South Korea, China, South Korea, Romania,
Всегда ебать душой.
Japan, Nigeria,
Serbia,
France, Mexico, Korea, Poland, Egypt, Vietnam, Canada, Sweden, Chile, Brazil, France, Japan, Nigeria, Mexico, Egypt, Poland, Korea, Brazil, Nigeria, France, Japan, Mexico, Korea, Egypt, Poland, Brazil, France, Nigeria,
Brazil,
Japan, Germany, Ghana, Peru, Thailand, Sweden, Vietnam, Canada, Chile, Italy, Iran, Turkey, Cuba, Germany, Thailand, Peru, Ghana, Norway, Ukraine, Spain, Kenya, Italy, Turkey, Cuba, Iran, Spain, Kenya, Norway, Ukraine, Italy, Iran, Cuba, Turkey,
South Korea,
Argentina, Belgium, India, Morocco, Finland, Israel, Pakistan, Jamaica, Argentina, Morocco, Belgium, India, Pakistan, Jamaica, Finland, Israel, Netherlands, Serbia, Laos, Tunisia, United States, Qatar, Hungary, Colombia, Laos, Tunisia, Netherlands, Serbia, Colombia, Hungary, Qatar, United States, Portugal, Denmark, Algeria, Iraq, Romania, Philippines, Thailand, Bolivia, Denmark, Portugal, Iraq, Algeria, Thailand, Bolivia, Romania, Philippines, China, Uruguay, Austria, South Africa, Belarus, Cambodia, Slovakia, Bangladesh, Austria, China, South Africa, Uruguay, Cambodia, Bangladesh, Belarus, Slovakia, Nepal, Iceland, Ecuador, New Zealand, Venezuela, Kuwait, Croatia, Saudi Arabia, Ecuador, Nepal, New Zealand, Iceland, Croatia, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Venezuela, Greece, Mongolia, Paraguay, Malaysia, Brunei, Myanmar, Hong Kong, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, Greece, Paraguay, Mongolia, Hong Kong, Sri Lanka, Brunei, Myanmar, Australia, Armenia, Taiwan, Palestine, Latvia, Estonia, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Taiwan, Australia, Armenia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Estonia, Latvia, Mexico, Korea, Poland, Egypt, Vietnam, Canada, Sweden, Chile, Brazil, France, Japan, Nigeria, Mexico, Egypt, Poland, Korea, Brazil, Nigeria, France, Japan, Mexico, Korea, Egypt, Poland, Brazil, France, Nigeria, Japan, Germany, Ghana, Peru, Thailand, Sweden, Vietnam, Canada, Chile, Italy, Iran, Turkey, Cuba, Germany, Thailand, Peru, Ghana, Norway, Ukraine, Spain, Kenya, Italy, Turkey, Cuba, Iran, Spain, Kenya, Norway, Ukraine, Italy, Iran, Cuba, Turkey, Argentina, Belgium, India, Morocco, Finland, Israel, Pakistan, Jamaica, Argentina, Gabon, Belgium, India, Pakistan, Jamaica, Finland, Israel, Netherlands, Serbia, Laos, Tunisia, United States, Qatar, Hungary, Colombia, Laos, Tunisia, Netherlands, Serbia, Colombia, Hungary, United States, Portugal, Denmark, Algeria, Iraq, Romania, Philippines, Ireland, Bolivia, Denmark, Portugal, Iraq, Algeria, Ireland, Bolivia, Romania, Philippines, China, Uruguay, Austria, South Africa, Belarus, Cambodia, Slovakia, Bangladesh, Austria, China, South Africa, Uruguay, Cambodia, Bangladesh, Belarus, Slovakia, Nepal, Iceland, Ecuador, New Zealand, Venezuela, Kuwait, Croatia, Saudi Arabia, Ecuador, Nepal, New Zealand, Iceland, Croatia, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Venezuela, Greece, Mongolia, Paraguay, Malaysia, Brunei, Myanmar, Hong Kong, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, Greece, Paraguay, Mongolia, Hong Kong, Sri Lanka, Brunei, Myanmar, Australia, Armenia, Taiwan, Palestine, Latvia, Estonia, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Taiwan, Australia, Palestine, Armenia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Estonia, Latvia.
South Korea, Germany, India, South Korea, Thailand, South Korea, Vietnam, South Korea, Brazil, South Egypt, South Korea, South Korea, South Vietnam, South Korea, Vietnam, South Korea, South Korea, Vietnam, South Korea, Brazil, Vietnam, South Korea, Brazil, United States, Vietnam, Brazil, South Korea, Vietnam, South Korea, Thailand, Vietnam, South Korea, Thailand, South Korea, Vietnam, Vietnam, India, Russia, Brazil, Indonesia, South Korea, Japan, South Korea, Vietnam, Singapore, Vietnam, Thailand, South Korea, Vietnam, South Vietnam, Singapore, Russia, Vietnam, Vietnam,
Magically cactus,
Vietnam,
city pero magically cactus,
Vietnam,
pero magically cactus, city pero bus,
Vietnam,
magically
South
cactus,
Korea, United
city
Japan,
pero bus,
South Korea, South Vietnam,
magically cactus, city pero bus,
Japan, China, South India, South Vietnam, China, Vietnam, China,
magically cactus, city pero bus,
Vietnam, South Korea,
magically
Vietnam, South
city
Korea,
pero
Ghana,
bus,
Indonesia,
magically cactus,
Vietnam,
city pero bus,
Brasil, Japan,
Vietnam,
Nigeria, France, Korea, Poland, Egypt,
South Korea, Myanmar,
Chile, Brazil,
Ghana,
France,
Vietnam,
Japan, Nigeria,
China,
Egypt, Poland, Korea,
South Korea,
Nigeria,
Thailand, China,
Korea, Egypt,
Vietnam,
Poland, Brazil,
Japan,
France, Nigeria,
Ghana,
Germany, Ghana, Peru, Thailand, Sweden, Vietnam, Canada, Chile,
South Korea,
Italy, Iran, Turkey,
Vietnam,
Cuba,
South Korea,
Germany, Thailand,
South
Peru,
Korea,
Ghana,
Vietnam,
Norway, Ukraine, Spain, Kenya,
South Korea,
Italy, Turkey, Cuba, Iran, Spain, Kenya, Norway,
Vietnam,
Ukraine,
Vietnam,
Italy, Iran, Cuba, Turkey.
Vietnam,
Argentina, Belgium, India, Morocco, Finland,
South
Israel,
Korea,
Pakistan, Jamaica, Argentina, Morocco, Belgium, India,
South Korea,
Jamaica, Finland,
South
Serbia, Laos, Tunisia, United States, Qatar, Hungary, Colombia, Laos, Tunisia, Netherlands, Serbia, Colombia, Hungary, Qatar, United States, Portugal, Denmark, Algeria, Iraq, Romania, Philippines, Ireland, Bolivia, Denmark, Portugal, Iraq, Algeria, Ireland, Bolivia, Romania, Philippines.
China, Uruguay, Austria, South Africa, Belarus, Cambodia, Slovakia, Bangladesh, Austria, China, South Africa, Uruguay, Cambodia, Bangladesh, Belarus, Slovakia.
Nepal, Iceland, Ecuador, New Zealand, Venezuela, Kuwait, Croatia, Saudi Arabia, Ecuador, Nepal, New Zealand, Iceland, Croatia, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Venezuela.
Japan,
Greece, Mongolia, Paraguay, Malaysia, Brunei, Myanmar, Hong Kong, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, Greece, Paraguay, Mongolia, Hong Kong, Sri Lanka, Brunei, Myanmar, Australia, Taiwan, Palestine, Latvia, Estonia, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Taiwan, Australia, Palestine, Armenia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Estonia, Latvia.
South Korea, Japan, South Korea, Japan,
Sage, are you bad? Bruce, like, beat him. Beat him.
South Korea, South
Sage, are you bad? Bruce, like, beat him.
South Korea, South Vietnam, United States, South Korea, Japan, South South Korea, South Korea, Bangladesh,
Japan,
South Korea,
Nigeria,
Bangladesh,
France, Mexico, Korea, Poland, Egypt, Vietnam, Canada, Sweden, Chile, Brazil, France, Japan, Nigeria,
Bangladesh,
Mexico, Egypt, Poland, Korea, Brazil, Nigeria, France, Japan, Mexico, Korea, Egypt, Poland, Brazil, France, Nigeria, Japan,
China,
Germany, Ghana, Peru, Thailand, Sweden, Vietnam, Canada, Chile, Italy, Iran, Turkey, Cuba, Germany, Thailand, Peru, Ghana, Norway, Ukraine, Spain, Kenya, Italy, Turkey, Cuba, Iran, Spain, Kenya, Norway, Ukraine, Italy, Iran, Cuba, Turkey,
Bangladesh,
Argentina, Belgium, India, Morocco, Finland, Israel, Pakistan, Jamaica, Argentina, Morocco, Belgium, India, Pakistan, Jamaica, Finland, Israel, Netherlands, Serbia, Laos, Tunisia, United States, Qatar, Hungary, Colombia, Laos, Tunisia, Netherlands, Serbia, Colombia, Hungary, Qatar, United States, Portugal, Denmark, Algeria, Iraq, Romania, Philippines, Ireland, Bolivia, Denmark, Portugal, Iraq, Algeria, Ireland, Bolivia, Romania, Philippines, China, Uruguay, Austria, South Africa, Belarus, Cambodia, Slovakia, Bangladesh, Austria, China, South Africa, Uruguay, Cambodia, Bangladesh, Belarus, Slovakia, Nepal, Iceland, Ecuador, New Zealand, Venezuela, Kuwait, Croatia, Saudi Arabia, Ecuador, Nepal, New Zealand, Iceland, Croatia, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Venezuela, Greece, Mongolia, Paraguay, Malaysia, Brunei, Myanmar, Hong Kong, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, Greece, Paraguay, Mongolia, Hong Kong, Sri Lanka, Brunei, Myanmar, Australia, Armenia, Taiwan, Palestine, Latvia, Estonia, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Taiwan, Australia, Parmast, Armenia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Estonia, Latvia.
Mexico, Korea, Poland,
Sri
Egypt,
Lanka,
Vietnam, Canada, Sweden, Chile, Brazil, France, Japan, Nigeria. Mexico, Egypt,
Sri Lanka,
Korea, Brazil, Nigeria,
Iraq,
France,
India,
Japan. Mexico, Korea, Egypt,
Bangladesh,
Brazil, France, Nigeria,
France,
Japan,
South
Germany, Ghana, Peru, Thailand, Sweden, Vietnam, Canada, Chile, Italy, Iran, Turkey, Cuba, Germany, Thailand, Peru, Ghana, Norway, Ukraine, Spain, Kenya, Italy, Turkey, Cuba, Iran, Spain, Kenya, Norway, Ukraine, Italy, Cuba, Turkey, Argentina, Belgium, India, Morocco, Finland, Israel, Pakistan, Jamaica, Argentina, Morocco, Belgium, India, Pakistan, Jamaica, Finland, Israel, Netherlands, Serbia, Laos, Tunisia, United States, Qatar, Hungary, Colombia, Tunisia, Netherlands, Serbia, Colombia, Hungary, United States,
South Korea,
Portugal, Denmark, Algeria, Iraq, Romania, Philippines, Ireland, Bolivia, Denmark, Portugal, Iraq, Algeria, Ireland, Bolivia, Romania, Philippines, Uruguay, Austria, South Africa, Belarus, Cambodia, Slovakia, Bangladesh, Austria, China, South Africa, Uruguay, Cambodia, Bangladesh, Belarus, Slovakia, Nepal, Iceland, Ecuador, New Zealand, Venezuela, Kuwait, Croatia, Saudi Arabia, Ecuador, Nepal, New Zealand, Iceland, Croatia, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Venezuela, Greece, Mongolia, Paraguay, Malaysia, Brunei, Myanmar, Hong Kong, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, Greece, Paraguay, Mongolia, Hong Kong, Sri Lanka, Brunei, Myanmar, Australia, Armenia, Taiwan, Palestine, Latvia, Estonia, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Taiwan, Australia, Palestine, Armenia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Estonia, Latvia.
South Mexico,
Ali cactus,
South
Siki piro, Haji Ali cactus,
Taiwan,
Siki piro, Haji Ali cactus, Siki piro, Haji Ali
United
cactus,
Kingdom, Malaysia,
Siki piro,
Taiwan, Turkey,
Haji Ali cactus, Siki piro,
Bangladesh, Turkey, Thailand, Turkey, Taiwan, Germany,
Haji Ali cactus, Siki piro,
Thailand, Bangladesh,
Haji Ali cactus,
Hungary,
Siki
Philippines,
piro,
Turkey,
Haji Ali cactus, Siki piro, Brazil, Japan, Nigeria, France, Mexico, Korea, Poland, Egypt,
South Korea,
Canada, Sweden,
Bangladesh,
Chile, Brazil,
South Korea,
France, Japan, Nigeria, Mexico, Egypt, Poland, Korea, Brazil,
South Korea, Bangladesh, Thailand, Turkey,
Poland, Brazil, France, Nigeria, Japan, Germany, Ghana, Peru, Thailand, Sweden, Vietnam, Canada, Chile, Italy, Iran, Turkey, Cuba, Germany, Thailand, Peru, Cuba, Turkey.
Argentina, Belgium, India, Morocco, Finland, Israel, Pakistan, Jamaica, Argentina, Morocco, Belgium, India, Pakistan, Jamaica, Finland, Israel, Serbia, Laos, Tunisia, United States, Qatar, Hungary, Colombia, Laos, Tunisia, Netherlands, Serbia, Colombia, Hungary, Qatar, United States,
Portugal, Denmark, Algeria, Iraq, Romania, Philippines, Ireland, Bolivia, Denmark, Portugal, Iraq, Algeria, Ireland, Bolivia, Romania, Philippines,
China, Uruguay, Austria, South Africa, Belarus, Cambodia, Slovakia, Bangladesh, Austria, China, South Africa, Uruguay, Cambodia, Bangladesh, Belarus, Slovakia.
Nepal, Iceland, Ecuador, New Zealand, Venezuela, Kuwait, Croatia, Saudi Arabia, Ecuador, Nepal, New Zealand, Iceland, Croatia, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Venezuela.
Bangladesh,
Greece, Mongolia, Paraguay, Malaysia, Brunei, Myanmar, Hong Kong, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, Greece, Paraguay, Mongolia, Hong Kong, Sri Lanka, Brunei, Myanmar, Australia, Namibia, Taiwan, Palestina, Latvia, Estonia, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Taiwan, Australia, Palestina, Armenia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Estonia, Latvia.
Bangladesh, Russia, India,
Say down your back, do a soy. Beat, beat,
India,
beat 'em.
France, Malaysia, India, China, Poland, Bangladesh, India,
Say down your back,
India,
beat, beat, beat 'em.
India, Bangladesh,
Say down your back, do a soy.
Bangladesh,
Beat, beat, beat 'em.
India,
Chile, Brazil, France, Japan, Nigeria, Mexico, Egypt, Poland, Korea, Brazil, Nigeria, France, Japan, Mexico, Korea, Egypt, Poland, Brazil, France, Nigeria, Japan, Germany, Ghana, Peru, Thailand, Sweden, Vietnam, Canada, Chile, Italy, Iran, Turkey, Cuba, Germany, Thailand, Peru, Ghana, Norway, Ukraine, Spain, Kenya, Italy, Turkey, Cuba, Iran, Spain, Kenya, Norway, Ukraine, Italy, Iran, Cuba, Turkey,
United States,
Argentina, Belgium, India, Morocco, Finland, Israel, Pakistan, Jamaica, Argentina, Morocco, Belgium, India, Pakistan, Jamaica, Finland, Israel, Netherlands, Syria, Laos, Tunisia, United States, Qatar, Hungary, Colombia, Laos, Tunisia, Netherlands, Serbia, Colombia, Hungary, Qatar, United States, Portugal, Denmark, Algeria, Iraq, Romania, Philippines, Ireland, Bolivia, Denmark, Portugal, Iraq, Algeria, Ireland, Bolivia, Romania, Philippines, China, Uruguay, Austria, South Africa, Belarus, Cambodia, Slovakia, Bangladesh, Austria, China, South Africa, Uruguay, Cambodia, Bangladesh, Belarus, Slovakia, Nepal, Iceland, Ecuador, New Zealand, Venezuela, Kuwait, Croatia, Saudi Arabia, Ecuador, Nepal, New Zealand, Iceland, Croatia, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Venezuela, Greece, Mongolia, Paraguay, Malaysia, Brunei, Myanmar, Hong Kong, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, Greece, Paraguay, Mongolia, Hong Kong, Sri Lanka, Brunei, Myanmar, Australia, Armenia, Taiwan, Palestine, Latvia, Estonia, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Taiwan, Australia, Armenia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Estonia, Latvia, Mexico, Korea, Poland, Egypt, Vietnam, Canada, Sweden, Chile, Brazil, France, Japan, Nigeria, Mexico, Egypt, Poland, Korea, Brazil, Nigeria, France, Japan, Mexico, Korea, Egypt, Poland, Brazil, France, Nigeria, Japan, Germany, Ghana, Peru, Thailand, Sweden, Vietnam, Canada, Chile, Italy, Iran, Turkey, Cuba, Germany, Thailand, Peru, Ghana, Norway, Ukraine, Spain, Kenya, Italy, Turkey, Cuba, Iran, Spain, Kenya, Norway, Ukraine, Italy, Iran, Cuba, Turkey, Argentina, Belgium, India, Morocco, Finland, Israel, Pakistan, Jamaica, Argentina, Morocco, Belgium, India, Pakistan, Jamaica, Finland, Israel, Netherlands, Serbia, Laos, Tunisia, United States, Qatar, Hungary, Colombia, Tunisia, Netherlands, Serbia, Colombia, Hungary, United States, Portugal, Denmark, Algeria, Iraq, Romania, Philippines, Ireland, Bolivia, Denmark, Portugal, Iraq, Algeria, Ireland, Bolivia, Romania, Philippines, China, Uruguay, Austria, South Africa, Belarus, Cambodia, Slovakia, Bangladesh, Austria, China, South Africa, Uruguay, Cambodia, Bangladesh, Belarus, Slovakia, Nepal, Iceland, Ecuador, New Zealand, Venezuela, Kuwait, Croatia, Saudi Arabia, Ecuador, Nepal, New Zealand, Iceland, Croatia, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Venezuela, Greece, Mongolia, Paraguay, Malaysia, Brunei, Myanmar, Hong Kong, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, Greece, Paraguay, Mongolia, Hong Kong, Sri Lanka, Brunei, Myanmar, Australia, Armenia, Taiwan, Palestine, Latvia, Estonia, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Taiwan, Australia, Palestine, Armenia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Estonia, Latvia.